The colony world of Arden was young and full of life. Fields of tall green grass stretched as far as the eye could see, and wide rivers carried water from the mountains to the valley. Where the settlers had built their towns, the people of Arden worked hard, but they also lived in peace. They believed their world was safe, far from war or danger. That belief began to change the night the signal came. Tomas was a watch officer. His job was to scan the stars with the long-range sensors. From the observation tower, most nights were calm, and he often grew sleepy listening to the soft hum of the machines. But this night was different. At first it was only a faint sound, like a whisper buried under static. He adjusted the receiver, and the sound grew clearer. It was a pulse, a strange rhythm that came from the void beyond Arden's skies. He frowned and leaned closer. The pulse did not match any known ship beacon or distress call. It repeated every 20 seconds, low and haunting, like a heartbeat. In the dark, Tomas checked the signal against the database, but nothing matched. It was unlike anything he had ever heard. At dawn, he brought the recording to the council chamber. The colony leaders gathered around the small device as the sound echoed in the room. It filled the hall with a cold emptiness, as if the stars themselves were whispering. A few people laughed nervously, saying it was probably just the stars, natural burst or a broken relay drifting in space, but others shifted uneasily. Glancing at the windows, as if the sound might follow them, the council leader, Mira, spoke calmly. "We must not panic. Signals come and go. We will study it." She asked Tomas to keep monitoring. He agreed, though he could not shake the chill that stayed in his bones. The days passed, and every night the signal returned. Each night it grew louder, clearer, as if something was drawing closer. Tomas recorded every pulse, marking the increase. His fellow officers began to complain of dreams they could not explain. One dreamed of drowning, another of falling from great heights. Even Tomas dreamed of his childhood home burning, though nothing like that had ever happened in his life. Whispers spread across Arden. The farmers said their animals grew restless at night, bleating and thrashing against their fences. Children cried in their sleep, clutching their parents and refusing to explain what frightened them. The settlers began to stay indoors once the sky darkened, as if night itself carried a threat. On the 7th night, Tomas brought the signal to the central square. He believed people needed to hear it with their own ears to understand. A large crowd gathered, expecting perhaps something ordinary, something that would finally explain their unease. When the pulse echoed from the speakers, silence fell over the square. No one laughed this time. The sound was heavy, not like a machine, but like something alive. It reached into the chest of every listener, as though it wanted to drag out the fear they kept hidden. A woman fainted. A child screamed and covered his ears. Even Mira, the council leader, clenched her fists and told Tomas to shut it off. He obeyed, but the silence afterward felt no safer. That night, Tomas sat alone in the observation tower. The stars looked the same as always, yet the signal kept pulsing from the darkness between them. He wrote in his log, "The signal grows stronger. It feels as if it is not calling us, but warning us." He did not know why he wrote those words. They came from some deep instinct, a warning he could not explain. By the 10th night, the signal shook. The tower's glass panels. The engineers tried to block it, but every attempt failed. It slipped through every filter, every shield, as if it were not sound at all but something deeper. The colonists stopped gathering in the square. They locked their doors, lit fires, and prayed the sound would fade. But Tomas knew the truth. Something was coming. The colonists of Arden had lived with peace for so long that they had forgotten. The universe could hold danger, but danger was moving closer. Carried on the waves of that echo, Tomas stayed awake, watching the stars, feeling the cold pulse in his bones. It was the beginning of something no one in Arden had ever faced. The first shadow had fallen, though no ship had yet been seen. The people of Arden tried to live as if nothing had changed, but the signal weighed on them each night. Work in the fields slowed, and laughter in the town grew rare. Even the children stopped playing outside when the sun dipped low. Everyone felt as if unseen eyes were watching from the dark sky above. Tomas stayed longer in the observation tower, his eyes fixed on the screens that scanned the heavens. On the 12th night, the signal suddenly stopped. For the first time in days, there was silence. The whole town breathed easier, believing perhaps the strange pulse had finally ended. Some even cheered in relief. But Tomas did not cheer. He stared at the empty readings on his screen and felt a new fear rise in him. The silence was not the end. It was the pause before something greater. The next evening, clouds gathered over Arden, though no storm had been predicted. The air grew thick, and the winds carried a low hum that seemed to echo the vanished signal. People stood in the streets, watching the sky turn from gold to gray to black. The silence broke with a deep roar that shook the valley. Then they saw it, from the clouds above. Dark shapes descended. They did not fall like meteors nor glide like ships. They drifted, tall and narrow, wrapped in shadow as if the night itself carried them down. When they landed beyond the hills, the ground trembled. From a distance they looked like towers or spires, but then they began to move. Children cried out, pointing at the hills. Adults hurried them indoors, but fear had already spread through the crowd. Word ran quickly through the colony. Something had come down from the sky. Mira called for calm, but even her voice shook as she sent Tomas and a group of scouts to investigate. The journey to the hills was short, but every step felt heavy. Tomas carried a lantern in one hand and his rifle in the other. The scouts followed quietly, their eyes wide as the land grew darker. When they reached the first ridge, they saw movement below. Figures stood in the open fields. They were tall, almost twice the height of a man, with long limbs that seemed too thin to carry their bodies. Their heads were covered by masks that gleamed faintly in the starlight. No one could see their faces. Their movements were silent, slow, and deliberate, as if they were not walking but gliding. One of the scouts whispered, "Humanoids." The word spread quickly, and from that night the colony would call them by that name. Tomas signaled the scouts to stay low. They watched as the humanoids gathered near the landing sites. The shadows around them seemed to grow thicker. It was hard to tell how many there were. 10, perhaps, or 50. Their shapes blurred when one looked along. Then the whispers began, soft at first, like a faint breeze brushing the air. Tomas shook his head, thinking it was the wind. But the sound grew stronger. The whispers came from within his own mind. They carried no words, only feelings, cold, sharp, and heavy, fear, memories of every failure, every moment of weakness he had ever known. He saw his family from years past turning away from him, leaving him alone. He saw flames taking the colony he had sworn to protect. His hands trembled, and his knees nearly gave way. The scouts cried out. One dropped his weapon and ran blindly into the dark. Another fell to the ground, clutching his head and shouting at voices no one else could hear. Tomas bit his lip until it bled, forcing his mind to stay clear. He grabbed the fallen scout by the shoulder and dragged him back up the ridge. "We cannot fight them here," he shouted. Back to the colony. They stumbled away, their hearts pounding, the whispers chasing them until the lights of the town came into view. Only then did the sound fade. The scouts were pale and shaking. One refused to speak at all, staring only at the ground. When Tomas stood before the council, Mira asked what he had seen. He described the figures, the masks, the whispers in the mind. The room fell silent. No one laughed this time. The colony knew now that the strange signal had been a warning. Something had come to Arden, and it carried not fire or steel but fear itself. That night no one slept. Families locked their doors and kept their lanterns burning. The hills beyond the town were dark, but everyone knew the humanoids were waiting there. The colony of Arden, once proud of its peace, now faced its first true test. Tomas sat on the tower roof, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. He could still feel the whispers pressing faintly against his mind. He whispered to himself, to keep calm. We are human. We will not bow. But deep in his chest he felt the truth. The longest night had only just begun. The sun rose over Arden, but the light did not bring comfort. The colonists woke from broken sleep, their faces pale, their eyes heavy with dread. No one spoke of dreams. Yet everyone carried the same haunted look. Mothers held their children close, and fathers sharpened tools as if preparing for a storm. Tomas walked through the town square. People looked to him with silent questions, but he had no answers. He only knew what he had seen with his own eyes. The tall masked figures standing in the fields and the whispers. That cut into his mind. He had faced many dangers before, but never one that reached inside him like that. Mira, the council leader, called a meeting in the hall. The council chamber was filled with farmers, workers, engineers, and guards. Everyone wanted to know what could be done. Tomas stood before them and described again the attack of fear, the whispers, and how some of the scouts had broken down. They are not stronger than us in body, Tomas said, but they do not need weapons. They turn our minds against us. That is how they fight. The hall filled with nervous voices. One man shouted that they should flee into the mountains. Another said they should try to speak with the strangers. Mira raised her hand and quieted the crowd. We cannot run, she said firmly. The colony is our home. We build it together, and we will not abandon it. We also cannot trust creatures that strike us with fear the moment we see them. We must learn how to resist them. Tomas nodded. We must face them. If we fall once, we will never rise again. The council agreed to send a stronger group to the hills to study the enemy and test their strength. Tomas was placed in command. By midday, 20 men and women gathered with rifles, lanterns, and signal flares. Their faces were pale, but their steps were steady. The group marched toward the hills. The grass swayed in the wind, and the sky seemed to quiet. Every sound made them turn their heads. When they reached the broken ridge, Tomas raised his hand. The field below was scattered with ruined huts, homes of the farmers who had lived there before the landing. Doors were ripped from hinges. Tools lay scattered on the ground, but no bodies were found. It was as if the settlers had simply fled in terror. They were not killed, Tomas said. They were made to run. The group spread out carefully. The first sign of movement came from the shadows near the huts. A tall figure stepped forward, mask shining faintly. Behind it, more shapes appeared, sliding from the darkness like smoke. The air grew heavy, and the whispers began again. Tomas clenched his teeth. The sound pushed into his head, whispering of every failure he had known. He saw himself as a boy, too weak to lift a tool, mocked by older men. He saw himself standing alone, blamed for mistakes that were not his. The memories felt real, though he knew they were not. His chest grew tight, and his vision blurred. Round him, his companions faltered. One woman dropped her rifle and screamed. A man turned and ran back toward the ridge. Others clutched their heads, trembling. The humanoids moved closer, their long limbs gliding across the ground. They did not raise weapons. They did not need to. The fear itself was their weapon. Tomas forced himself to act. He shouted above the whispers, "Stand firm. They are only shadows." His voice broke through the terror for a moment. He lifted his rifle and fired. The shot rang through the valley. One of the humanoids staggered back. Its mask cracked, and beneath it there was no face, only a shifting mist that faded into the air. The others did not fall. Instead, they advanced faster. Their whispers grew louder, striking deeper. Tomas felt his legs shake, but he fired again. The colonists followed his lead. Flashes lit the dark field as rifles cracked again and again. Each shot slowed the advance, though none of the creatures truly fell. Then something strange happened. As the humans fired, the whispers weakened. The fear did not vanish, but it no longer crushed their minds as before. Tomas realized that action itself broke the hold. Courage grew from fighting back. He shouted, "Do not give in. Fire. All of you." The colonists roared and shot together. The humanoids stopped, their shapes flickering in the lantern light. For the first time, the enemy retreated. One by one they slipped back into the shadows, leaving the field silent once more. The humans stood gasping, sweat pouring down their faces. Some fell to their knees in relief. Others looked around in shock that they were still alive. Tomas lowered his rifle. He knew this was only the beginning. The humanoids had tested them, and they had barely held the line. The fight had proven to truths the enemy could be resisted, but the cost of fear would be high. When the group returned to the colony, the people gathered around to hear what had happened. Tomas told them everything. He spoke not only of the danger, but of the small victory. The colonists cheered for the first time in many days. Hope returned, though it was fragile. As night fell once more, Tomas looked to the hills. The shadows were waiting there, patient and silent. He knew they would come again. The first clash had ended, but the longest night was far from over. The victory in the hills gave the colony a small spark of hope, but Tomas knew it would not last long. The humanoids had retreated, yet their presence weighed heavily over Arden. The farmers did not return to their fields, and workers stayed. Close to town, the council met again, and this time their voices were not filled with doubt, but with urgency. Mira, standing tall before the people, spoke clearly. We cannot wait for the enemy to strike when they choose. We must prepare for. Tonight, we must hold the town together as one. Tomas agreed. He had felt the whispers and nearly fallen to them. Only courage and action had pushed them back. Now he needed every colonist to stand strong. He organized guards to watch the walls and placed lanterns on every street. Engineers set up generators to power strong lights, for Tomas believed the shadows gave the enemy strength. Families were gathered into the central square, where they could remain close and not face the night alone. As the sun sank behind the hills, Arden transformed. Fires burned in iron bowls, rifles were placed within reach, and every person stood ready. The children huddled with their mothers, singing old songs to keep fear away. The men and women who had faced the humanoids in the hills walked through the crowd, sharing their story of survival. Their words carried courage, but the air was still heavy. Everyone knew the night would be long. Tomas climbed the observation tower. From there he could see the valley stretching out into the darkness. At first all was still. The stars shone bright, and the fires in the square flickered like beacons. But then the signal returned. The old pulse, the sound that had first warned of danger, rolled through the night. It throbbed in the air, low and steady, shaking the hearts of all who heard it. Children cried out, and even the bravest guards shifted uneasily. Tomas lifted a hand, calling for calm. It is only sound. They want us afraid before the even arrive. His words carried down to the square, and though fear remained, people clenched their fists and tried to stay strong. Then shadows appeared on the ridges. One by one, tall shapes stood against the starlight. Their glowing masks shone faintly like cold moons. The humanoids were here. The whispers began again, sliding into the minds of the colonists. Memories returned, not of joy but of sorrow and fear. A farmer saw the storm that had once destroyed his crops. A mother saw her child drowning, though the boy stood safe at her side. A young guard saw himself lying lifeless on the ground. Each vision was sharp and cruel, designed to break the spirit. Some fell to their knees, clutching their heads. Others screamed and tried to run. Tomas shouted from the tower, "Hold together. Do not give them your fear. Stay in the light." The guards lit more fires. Engineers powered the generators, and bright beams cut across the square. The shadows shrank from the light, though the humanoids did not vanish. They moved closer, circling the town, their whispers growing louder. The first clash came at the northern gate. 3 humanoids glided forward, their long limbs reaching through the bars as if the iron itself were nothing. The guards fired, and sparks lit the night. One mast shattered, and the creature dissolved into mist. But 2 more pressed on, their whispers rattling the minds of the defenders. One guard dropped his rifle and backed away. Another froze in terror. Tomas rushed down from the tower, his rifle in hand. He fired again and again until the humanoids retreated. The guards looked at him with wide eyes. He pointed to the fires. "Stay near the light. It weakens them. Remember this." The battle spread round the town. At the western wall, whispers nearly broke a group of settlers, but the singing of children drew them back to courage. At the southern gate, engineers used flares to drive shadows away. The humanoids struck again and again, but the humans pushed back with fire, song, and courage. The night stretched on, and exhaustion pressed heavy on every heart, yet no one fled the square. No one abandoned the colony, even when fear clawed at their minds. They held each other's hands and stood in the firelight. Tomas moved from place to place, his voice steady, his rifle ready. He knew he could not allow fear to spread, for once it broke them, the colony would fall. Hours passed, the signal pulsed without end, and the whispers never stopped. But the fires burned strong, the lights held, and the people of Arden endured. By the time the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, the humanoids had withdrawn again. Slipping back into the ridges, the colonists collapsed in relief, some weeping, others silent with exhaustion. Tomas looked to the east, where the sky grew pale. He knew the battle was far from over. This was only the first night of many. The humanoids had tested their strength, and they had survived. But the war against fear had only just begun. The dawn after the long night was pale and weak. The sun rose, but its warmth did not bring comfort. The colonists of Arden gathered in the square, their faces hollow with exhaustion. Many had not closed their eyes even once, mothers cradled children who had cried through the night. Fathers tried to stand, although their hands still shook. Mira addressed the crowd with a steady voice. "We have endured the first night. We did not fall. The enemy struck us with fear, but we are still here. That means we can endure again." The words gave some courage, yet Tomas saw the doubt in their eyes. He knew courage built on alone would not last forever. They needed more than bravery. They needed a way to weaken the enemy's hold. Tomas returned to the observation tower. He studied the recordings of the signal. For hours he listened, again and again, until the sound carved itself into his mind. Then he noticed something strange. The pulse was not endless. It repeated in perfect cycles. Every few minutes, the pattern began again. At first he thought it was simple rhythm, but then he realized it was not just rhythm, it was memory. The whispers the humanoids used also followed patterns. When fear filled his mind, it was never something new. It was always an old wound, an old weakness. The visions repeated, shaped from memories already within. They were not reading the future. They were replaying what was already there. They are not gods, Tomas whispered to himself. They do not create fear. They only echo it. This thought gave him strength. If fear was an echo, then perhaps it could be broken. He rushed to Mira and the council. They are not endless. Their whispers are built from loops, from old patterns. That is why the signal repeats. That is why the visions repeat. We can break it. The council listened carefully. Mira asked, "How do we break fear itself?" Tomas thought hard. By drowning it out, by filling the air with something stronger. If they echo fear, then we must echo courage. We must fill the night with sound that belongs to us. Not them. The engineers considered his idea. They had speakers and transmitters used for alerts and farming calls. They could carry voices and music across the colony. If the people united, they could create a wall of human sound against the whispers. That afternoon, Tomas gathered everyone. Tonight we do not only defend with fire and rifles. We will defend with our voices. Songs, stories, and courage will fill the square. If we stand silent, their whispers will fill us. If we make noise, they cannot. At first the people were unsure. Many felt too tired to sing or too afraid to shout. But Tomas reminded them of the children who had sung old songs the night before, and how those songs had helped the guards hold the walls. Slowly, the people began to prepare. Musicians tuned their instruments. Mothers taught children simple songs, and the engineers set up every speaker they could find. When night came, the colony looked different. Fires burned bright, rifles were ready, but now the square was filled with sound. Drums pounded, voices rose together in a single chant. Laughter broke the silence. Forced but real, the air was alive with human courage. The humanoids returned as the stars grew bright. Their tall forms appeared on the ridges, their masks glowing. The signal pulsed again. The same hollow rhythm. The whispers crept into minds, cold and sharp. But this time they struck against a wall of sound. The music and chanting filled the hearts of the colonists, drowning the echoes of fear. Tomas stood in the tower, shouting into the transmitter. They cannot break us. Their echoes are weak. Remember who you are. Remember that you are human. The colonists roared together, their voices carrying across the night. The humanoids faltered. Their steps slowed. Their shadows wavered in the firelight. The echoes of fear repeated. But the people recognized the pattern now. They shouted against it. They laughed at the visions. The fear no longer ruled them. At the north gate, one humanoid advanced. The whispers struck a guard with visions of his brother's death. The man trembled. But then he sang louder, forcing the memory away. His fellow guards joined him, and together they fired, until the figure dissolved into mist. At the southern wall, children shouted verses of old rhymes. The humanoids hesitated as the rhythm broke their echo. They retreated from the lights, their glowing masks dimming. For the first time since the arrival, the colonists pushed forward. They chased the shadows back with flares and drums. They fought, not only with rifles, but with songs and courage. The night was still hard, but it was no longer hopeless. By dawn, the humanoids were gone again, leaving only silence in their wake. The colony was still standing, and the people were stronger. They had found the first key to survival. Mira addressed them at sunrise. We have learned something new. Fear is only an echo, and we have broken it. They will return, but now we know how to fight. Tomas stood beside her, weary but proud. He knew the battle was not over. The enemy would strike again, stronger and more cunning. But the colonists had taken the first step. They had shown that humanity could fight back not just with weapons, but with courage that no shadow could silence. The longest night was not yet ended, but a flame now burned in Arden that would not be put out. The second dawn came brighter than the first. The colonists of Arden stood taller, their voices no longer weighed down by silence. They had faced the humanoids again and had not only endured, but struck back. The memory of their own singing and shouting still rang in their ears. For once, the whispers had not broken them. Yet Tomas knew the enemy would not give up so easily. The humanoids had been forced to retreat, but they would return with greater force. He walked through the colony square, speaking with guards and families. Every person he passed gave him a nod or a word of thanks, but he reminded them, "We are not finished. We cannot rest. We must be ready." The engineers worked quickly that day. They repaired the speakers, built stronger lights, and set up more transmitters along the walls. Farmers who once held plows now carried rifles. Children practiced chants and songs, eager to help. The colony had turned into a fortress, but one built not only of wood and steel, but also of courage. Mira met with Tomas near the tower. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have given the people hope. That is the first victory. But now we must give them more than hope. We must give them a plan." Tomas agreed. "Last night we learned the echoes can be broken. Tonight we must push them back even further. We cannot remain trapped in the square forever. If we show them we can fight beyond our walls, they may think twice before they strike again." So the council agreed. That evening, when the stars rose, the colonists did not wait for the humanoids to circle them. Instead, they gathered in the open fields. Fires were lit across the valley, forming a wide ring of light. The people carried drums, horns, and torches along with rifles. They would not hide. They would face the enemy in the open. As night deepened, the signal returned. The old rhythm pulsed once more, steady and haunting. The colonists raised their voices at once, filling the valley with sound. The chants rolled like thunder, drowning the whispers before they grew strong. The humanoids appeared on the ridges. Dozens of tall figures glided forward, their masks glowing faintly. The colonists did not step back. Instead, they beat drums, louder, and shouted with all their strength. The whispers struck hard, sharper than before. Tomas felt them tear into his mind. He saw visions of fire swallowing the colony, of Mira falling, of every child weeping in fear. For a moment, despair rose in him, but then he looked at the people around him, their faces fierce and bright in the firelight. He shouted, "They are lies. Stand strong." The colonists roared together, and the whispers cracked like thin glass. The humanoids moved closer, rifles fired, and lanterns blazed. One by one, the tall figures stumbled back, their masks shattering under the force of human defiance. But more came, their numbers growing. The field turned into a storm of light and shadow. At the southern fire line, a group of humanoids nearly broke through. The settlers there faltered as the whispers pressed harder. Tomas rushed with a squad of guards. He lifted a flare high and shouted into the darkness, "This is our world. You will not take it." The flare burst, flooding the field with light. The humanoids froze as if the fire burned their very shadows. The guards fired as one, and the creatures dissolved into mist. At the northern ridge, children's voices carried over the battle, singing an old hymn taught by their grandparents. The sound cut through the fear like a blade. Grown men and women felt strength return to their limbs, and they pushed forward, driving the enemy back step by step. The fight lasted for hours. Each wave of whispers tried to break the colonists, but each time they answered with sound. With courage, with light, fear no longer owned them. The humanoids seemed weaker now, their movements slower, their masks dimmer. By midnight, the enemy began to falter. Their lines broke, and their forms blurred. For the first time, the colonists saw the humanoids truly retreat. Not just step back into the ridges, but flee across the valley, fading into the night. The signal that had haunted Arden for weeks grew faint, as if the very echo of fear was losing its power. The colonists raised their torches high and shouted in triumph. Tears ran down their faces, not of despair, but of pride. They had fought not only with rifles, but with unity. And they had won. When dawn came, the valley was quiet. The fires still burned, and the people stood together, weary but unbroken. Mira stood before them and raised her voice. "We have faced the enemy and driven them away. We have shown them that humanity is not weak. Fear may strike us, but we will never bow." Tomas looked at the rising sun. His body ached, and his eyes were heavy. But his heart was strong. The humanoids might return, but they would never again find Arden helpless. Humanity had discovered its strength, courage, unity, and hope were stronger than fear. The longest night was not yet over, but humanity had turned the tide. The third dawn broke over Arden with golden light spilling across the valley. The air felt fresh, and the sky was clear for the first time in many nights. Fires still smoldered in the fields, and the colonists stood weary but upright. They had faced the echoes of fear, and they had not fallen. Tomas walked through the colony square. Everywhere he looked, he saw people rebuilding. Men carried wood to repair broken fences. Women cleared debris from the fields. Children fetched water and sang as they worked. There was still exhaustion in their eyes, but beneath it burned something new, something strong. It was pride. The signal that had haunted them for so long was gone. The air no longer pulsed with that endless rhythm. Instead, there was silence, deep and pure. For many, the silence itself felt strange, as if they had forgotten what peace sounded. Like Mira gathered the people together once more. She stood on the steps of the hall, her face pale from lack of sleep but her voice firm. "We have endured the longest night of our lives. We faced the shadows that tried to break us, and we sent them back. We know now that fear is their weapon, but we also know it can be broken. Arden will not bow. Humanity will not bow." The crowd cheered, voices rising together in strength. It was not the sound of celebration alone, but the sound of survival. Tomas remained at the edge of the crowd, his thoughts heavy, though the humanoids had retreated. He did not believe they were gone forever. Somewhere out there, in the deep night between the stars, they were waiting. They would return when they believed. The colony weak again. Tomas knew this truth, but he also knew something greater. When they returned, Arden would be ready. That evening, the colony held a gathering in the square. Torches were lit not out of fear, but out of tradition. Musicians played, and families danced. The children who had sung during the night stood proudly, their voices carrying across the valley. The songs were no longer just defenses. They were now a reminder that the human heart could turn even fear into strength. As the music rose, Tomas sat near the tower steps. Mira joined him, carrying 2 cups of water. She handed one to him and looked at the sky. "You have given the colony more than survival," she said. "You have given them belief. That is something even I could not have done alone." Tomas shook his head. "It was not me. It was all of us, every voice, every flame, every hand that refused to give in. That is what broke the echo." Mir smiled. "Perhaps, but someone had to be the first to stand." They sat together in silence for a time, listening to the laughter and music of their people. It was a sound Tomas wanted to remember forever. When the stars appeared that night, no signal followed them. The sky was silent. Yet Tomas watched carefully from the tower. He knew it was only a matter of time before the shadows tried again. But now he no longer felt dread when he thought of their return. Instead, he felt steady, calm, and ready. He wrote in his log, "Fear is not a weapon if the heart refuses it. Fear is only an echo, and echoes fade when drowned by courage." Days turned into weeks. The colony repaired its homes and planted its fields again. Families sang at night not because they feared the whispers, but because they had learned the power of their voices. Guards stood watch with rifles, but also with drums and horns. Light and sound became part of Arden's strength. Travelers from other settlements heard the story of the humanoids and came to see Arden for themselves. They expected to find a colony broken by fear, but instead they found a people standing tall, with songs on their lips and fire in their eyes. The story spread quickly, and with it spread a lesson. Humanity's true strength was not in steel or ships, but in its spirit. One evening, a young boy asked Tomas, "Will they ever come back?" Tomas placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and answered, "Perhaps, but if they do, we will face them together. Fear cannot rule us if we refuse to bow. Remember that." The boy nodded, his small chest lifting with pride. He ran off to join his friends, their laughter filling the air. Tomas watched him go, a smile on his face. The longest night had tested humanity, but humanity had endured. The humanoids had brought fear, but the colonists had found courage greater than fear. Dawn had risen over Arden, and with it had risen the spirit of its people. Whatever shadows might come in the future, the colony now knew one truth. Humanity was not fragile. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was unbreakable.